the useless information, the things that we think about when we want to escape. Time flies like an arrow, but fruit flies like a banana. I mean, fruit flies don't fly like a banana. Even bananas probably don't fly like bananas. Not like I've seen a banana fly. Have you seen? I'm just saying that fruit flies like a banana, okay? I'm sorry, the other day I slipped and hit my head. I still feel a bit woozy and, well, sorry if I don't make much sense. Jason Padgett also didn't make much sense after he was hit in the head in 2002. He was an ordinary adolescent. He didn't do that well in school and considered math useless. One September night, he was out on one of the many night outs he had, and after singing karaoke at a pub, Jason was just about to call it a night. Before he knew it, he'd been hit in the back of his head by two men, beaten profusely and left there with his injuries. People at the hospital sent him home after diagnosing a concussion and a bleeding kidney, thinking nothing more of it. In Jason's head, however, things were far worse. He, almost overnight, developed an intense germophobia and a general OCD with things. He would wash his hands over and over again, and completely locked himself into his home. It was during one of those many hand washes that he noticed the water streaming down the sink. Instead of seeing the droplets slowly recede into the sink like usual, he noticed an almost fragmented reality. It was like a video, he says, that he watched frame by individual frame. He would spend hours trying to draw what he saw in the form of fractal diagrams. One day, he was drawing them while he was at a mall, and a person walking by him took keen interest. He happened to be a mathematician, who for once could appreciate what Jason was seeing in all its mathematical glory. He explained to Jason that the things he was describing were discoveries that were Nobel Prize worthy, and that he should really consider focusing on it full time. At this time, Jason thought he was going insane. He even contacted psychologists about his symptoms. They eventually diagnosed him with acquired Savant syndrome and placed him in a synesthesia group study. Synesthesia is a phenomenon of sensory hyperconnectivity where one can experience multimodal sensations, like seeing sound or tasting a memory. Some of our favorite musicians like Lord and Pharrell Williams have it, and Jason was diagnosed with some version of it, although in his case, it's expressed in math rather than music. Jason has now become a number theorist. Scientists say the region of the brain that allows savants to do what they do exists in all of us. It just so happens that most of us don't have access to them. So there could be a number theorist in all of us. Anybody could be anything. Anything could be in anything. But wait, maybe I'm just losing my mind again. Everything cannot be in everything. A country, for example, cannot be in another country, can it? Presenting to you Dahala Kagrabari. It's a part of India within a part of Bangladesh within a part of India. Let me explain. An enclave is a part of a country that is surrounded by foreign territory. The Vatican City is one such enclave. But contrary to the Vatican, where people speak Italian, people living in places like Dahala Kagrabari speak a different language, are part of a different culture, and, quite simply, live a different life. Dahala Kagrabari was one of only 3 third-order enclaves, meaning it is an enclave within another enclave within another enclave. How did this all come to be? Well, this bizarre geographic anomaly seems to have been caused by an equally bizarre pastime. Chess. Yes, when kings of the 18th century weren't executing people at will, they were playing chess with them. It seems to be a result of this chess playing that entire groups of people were just moved around at a time where the borders were yet to be drawn. Fast forward 300 years, the borders are here, but their situation was largely unresolved. These people had no legal existence or a way to get into their homeland. They were not granted basic necessities by the government or the territory in which they reside. After the independence wars in the 20th century in the Indian subcontinent, these enclaves persisted for an additional 80 years before finally, in 2015, it was ceded to Bangladesh by India. Up until then, of course, Dahala Kagrabari was in India. Or was it Bangladesh? I don't know. Now, there are more bizarre things in this world, of course. For example, the group of people that wear sunglasses at night. I mean, what are you doing? Where is the sun? Sunglasses were clearly invented to protect your eyes against the sun, right? Well, not exactly. Turns out, sunglasses were invented for justice. No, not that kind of justice. Sunglasses were most likely popularized by the Chinese in the 1200s. Their purpose? So that the judges can impartially interrogate witnesses without giving away their facial expressions. The eyes can do a lot of the talking, and judges at the time had to dissociate themselves from the people they were about to question. Anyone who has tried to lie or has been lied to knows that the eyes can do a lot of talking in tense situations. Speaking of tense situations, you know the time when man traveled 310,000 kilometers on a journey never before done to walk on the surface of the moon? Well, Neil Armstrong and the Apollo 11 crew made that journey and came back to tell the tale. Of course, they didn't know whether they were going to come back or not. In fact, a lot of the trial runs resulted in the loss of life even before anything left the ground. They were all military servicemen, and so the thought of not coming back wasn't unforeseen. But at least they wanted to ensure the well-being of their loved ones if they couldn't make it. Now, insurance companies know a risky bet when they see one, and to say that going to the moon was risky would be an understatement. So of course, the crew had to improvise. The crew ended up signing hundreds of autographs, with the hope that if they failed to return, the value of their signatures alone would see out the families for the rest of their lives. Of course, those autographs were never needed in the end. But it's interesting to wonder what a Neil Armstrong NFT could be worth in today's money. But willing to spend so much money on NFTs is kinda strange. Even sinful, some might say. This is not the only sinful desire we have in our day-to-day ruminations, of course. It's remarkable how little has changed in that respect. Promiscuity was perhaps harder to get away with back then, but that didn't stop people from trying. One devout Christian, however, Lamarcus Thompson, wanted people to use their time for less sinful endeavors. He wanted to build something that would take people's minds away from the pubs, the saloons, and the brothels that they used to go to. He got inspiration from a coal-carrying train in Pennsylvania. The train would slowly carry coal over a mountain before dropping 60 feet under the force of gravity. Now, that may not sound like much of a thrill ride compared to the things we do today, but in the 1800s, the 60-mile-per-hour speed of this train was enough to accelerate passengers. Thompson sold his hosiery business and devoted all his time to build what would be the world's first amusement-themed roller coaster. After months and months of designs, Thompson eventually built a 50-foot-high, 600-feet switchback roller coaster in a place known for being promiscuous, Coney Islands. At just 6 miles per hour, this was far slower than anything you and I would consider exciting. But it was such a novelty at the time that when the business took off, Thompson was making well over $15,000 per day. From making underwear to thrilling people into needing more, Thompson died a very rich man. Speaking of underwear, Norway is now calling its military conscripts to return underwear worn during conscription. The obligation seems to have arisen from pandemic-related shortages in the past years. But then again, this is not the first time Norway's resources were spread thin. In 2011, Norway went through a butter crisis that led to more than just dry toast. The regularity with which people in Norwegian cultures consume butter means that when the news of the shortage reached people's ears, butter stocks ran off the shelves in minutes, and there was market-wide inflation. It all started when heavy rainfall in the prior season led to poor grazing, which in turn reduced milk production from the cows. The butter panic eventually affected foreign policy, whereby Norway had to reduce tariffs to make importing butter easier. On an individual level, the effect was just as apparent as people were literally caught smuggling butter through the borders. But I can empathize with the Norwegian people. It is indeed quite infuriating when a system is in place and it doesn't work when you need it most. It's a lot like lab equipment. It always fails when you need it. Anyone who has even spent a brief moment in a lab would know the tension inside that place simply because very simple things cannot be accomplished when lab equipment is not working. Well, it turns out that happens to the best of us. Wolfgang Pauli, the Austrian theoretical physicist, is known for significant contributions to the field of quantum mechanics, most notably by his Pauli exclusion principle. He was a remarkable theoretical physicist, and spent most of his time with pen and paper rather than with experimental equipment. Hence, it follows that occasionally, whenever Pauli would have to deal with equipment, he would break it. It turns out, the faulty equipment became such a regularity that merely his presence was sufficient to convince his peers about why certain equipment failed. They ended up dubbing this phenomenon as the Pauli effect, essentially the tendency of lab equipment to fail for seemingly no material reason, other than the presence of a theoretician. The phenomenon had gained so much traction after its inception that Pauli's friend, Otto Stern, had literally banned Pauli from entering his laboratory, despite them being good friends. Pauli even attempted to write an article, Background Physics, to try and explain things inexplicably breaking as soon as he entered a room. Anecdotes followed that Pauli's car broke down during his honeymoon, a chair broke down at a Zurich festival for no reason whatsoever, the train station ran into a failure as soon as Pauli switched stations, a cyclotron burnt right before his eyes, and so much more. The effect was so eerie that Pauli eventually lamented to himself that such mischief had to have been the Pauli effect. I guess none of us have destroyed particle accelerators or cyclotrons in our lives yet, but we've all messed up things on paper, like using the wrong units when doing calculations. I'm sure it stings, but my teachers always told me that these mistakes are okay, and that as long as I have the concepts down pat, I'm gonna be alright. Right? Well, not for the pilots of Air Canada Flight 143. On a nice July day, a brand new 767, state-of-the-art at the time, took to the skies to fly from Montreal to Edmonton. Less than halfway through the flight, the pilots noticed a fuel pressure warning on one of the engines. The warnings persisted and eventually rang up for both of the plane's engines. A few minutes later, the engines ran out of fuel entirely, and the plane was essentially turned into a very large and heavy glider. Thanks to the exceptional skill, the plane was eventually able to land at a nearby runway turned drag strip with no loss of life, and only minor injuries that took place during the evacuation. The heroics of the pilots were truly highlighted when months after the incident, different crews across Canada had tried to land a 767 in a simulator under similar conditions. Nobody was able to pull it off. But why did this happen in the first place? After all, it was a brand new plane. Well, it turned out, one of the fuel gauges weren't functioning properly when the plane was being refueled. As a result, the fuel amount had to be manually verified before the plane was given the all-clear from Montreal. It turned out everyone involved in the process was trained in the metric system. But the 767 was one of the first jets where the instruments were reported in imperial units. Essentially, the person who was doing the refueling thought they were loading up the plane with around 22,000 kilograms of fuel, when, in truth, they were really filling it up with 12,000 kilograms of fuel, which conveniently comes up to be around 22,000 in pounds. So, the plane took off with less than half the fuel it needed to complete the trip. So many problems in our lives come from simple miscommunication. It really makes you wonder what the world would be like if, say, we all used the same measurement systems or spoke the same language. But humans, ironically, what makes us strongest also makes us the weakest. It's our ability to work together, or the lack thereof. The fate of our entire species comes down to what we should be able to do the best, but instead, we do the exact opposite. Life has a certain irony to it, and I think it's this irony that not only makes life painful, but also makes life worth living. As Thanos said best, life is perfectly balanced, as all things should be. As I was getting ready to go out the other day, I realized I couldn't button my pants up all the way. I realized I was gravitationally challenged, and that I had been growing in all the wrong directions. So I started doing what any reasonable person would do in my situation. Jogged my way to work every morning, checked the gluten content in my rice I was about to eat, intermittent fasted daily, and ate celery like it was my cheat meal. You know, the usual. It didn't quite work out. But now that I was back from the hospital, and the therapist, I actually found the smart way to lose weight. Play chess. Yes, chess grandmasters actually lose an astonishing amount of weight over competitions. Over a tournament, they have been known to burn over 6,000 calories per day. To put that into perspective, at the peak of his training, this is about as many calories as Usain Bolt ate. Even the obesity-inclined population of the United States only manages to eat about 3,000 calories per day. And as any dietitian would tell you, the concept of weight loss can be simplified down to the ideas of calories in, calories out. If you are eating more than you're burning, you gain weight. But if you are burning more than you're eating, you lose weight. If these chess grandmasters were on the typical American diet, they would still be operating on an astonishing calorie deficit of 2,200 calories. Even bodybuilders who are cutting their calories don't cut more than 300 to 400 per day. Of course, these chess, let's say athletes, know this and eat more to compensate. But it takes quite a bit of eating to do that, and so most grandmasters end up losing a remarkable amount of weight over tournaments. Some of them burn as many calories over a 2-hour game as Roger Federer playing an hour of singles tennis. There was also a championship that was called off simply because the players lost too much weight. It's also baffling considering sedentary games like chess are usually not associated with anything physically intense that could cause such extreme weight loss. Of course, that is until you realize that our brain consumes about 20% of all the calories that we eat. Chess, being one of the more cognitively demanding games out there, ramps up that caloric demand drastically, which would explain this bizarre phenomenon. But anything to lose some weight and look good, right? But if you're in the mood for some delicious calories anyways, why don't you drive to a Michelin star restaurant in a car with Michelin tires? But wait, do the two have anything to do with each other? The tire company was founded in 1889 and certainly predates the restaurant rating franchise, so they certainly weren't founded at the same time. But are they connected is the question. As it turns out, Michelin realized that they need people to buy more cars and drive farther for there to be a profitable demand for their tires. Driving far was something that people at the time were not in the habit of doing, at least not back then. This was partly down to the fact that the transportation revolution had only recently started, and people were accustomed to traveling only as far as a horse carriage would go. To get people going farther to make use of their tires, Michelin came up with the idea of a list that would rank restaurants based on how much travel they warranted. For example, a 1-star restaurant would simply be a good restaurant in its category, not much else to say. A 2-star restaurant would be worth a small detour, and a 3-star restaurant would deserve a trip of its own. The first edition of the guide was given out for free. With nearly 35,000 copies distributed, it mostly contained routes, gas stations, hotels, and so on. With time, the guide, eventually known as the Michelin Guide, gained legitimacy in the food industry to slowly become the hallmark of fine cuisine that we know it to be today. So yes, Michelin tires and Michelin stars are actually related to each other. You know, it's unbelievable how far some companies will go to promote their products. But if what Michelin did wasn't enough for you, let me tell you what Red Bull did to ramp up demand for their energy drink. As energy drinks gained popularity, Red Bull realized they needed to do something to grab people's attention, something a bit unusual. To give people the illusion that Red Bull was in hot demand, the company started filling trash bins around London with empty cans of the drink. They also gave free samples to DJs and intentionally left cans lying around pubs, all to give people the illusion that people couldn't get enough of this drink. And once that gets people thinking, half the job is done. Then they started wondering what about the drink makes it so seemingly popular, and they went ahead and tried it themselves. And that's the story of how the advertising of Red Bull gave it wings. Oh, wait, about that. So, you know how Red Bull's slogan used to be that it gave you wings? Well, Red Bull does not, in fact, give you wings. Of course, you and I know that. Probably. But the fact that they claim it does was considered deceptive advertising by some customers of the drink. The company tried to defend itself by claiming that while it does not give you wings in the physical sense, it does boost cognitive and athletic performance by way of increased reaction speeds and concentration. However, even these claims were somewhat murky and ultimately did not deter a class action lawsuit against Red Bull. The company paid over $13 million to settle the case, and allegedly offered $10 checks to people who were disappointed that the drink did not literally give them wings. I'm not sure whether to be disappointed that people expected an energy drink to actually give them wings, or to be kind of impressed that they actually went on with a case like this and actually got some money out of it. Speaking of energy and concentration, some of us are, well, getting old. And while all that wisdom on Reddit has made us all sages in our own right, our newfound wisdom is showing itself in more than just the memes we share. We're getting wrinkles. Now, I know what you're going to say. Self-love is the one true answer. Love your imperfections, love your wrinkles, and so on and so forth. But if those wrinkles are indeed bothering you, I have the perfect fix for you. Just do what Anatoli Bugorski did and stick your head into a synchrotron beam. Yes, Anatoli Bugorski, a Russian particle physicist, was taking the stairs on June 3, 1978, on his way down to the U-70 particle accelerator in Padgett, south of Moscow. It was the largest particle accelerator in the world at the time, and he was heading down there to fix a simple engineering flaw in the device. As with any such device, there were multiple safety mechanisms, multiple redundancies to prevent exactly what was about to happen. A series of safety failures led to an unlocked door, one which Anatoli walked through to a live particle accelerator. Anatoli had trained to rely on the numerous safeties, and since none of them actually turned on, he carried on with his work. As he bent down towards the beam of the particle accelerator to fix it, Anatoli was hit headfirst with nearly 70 million electron volts. The particles were thought to have deposited 200,000 rads upon entrance into his head. This hyperstimulated the optic nerve, which created a sensation of the brightest light ever, as reported by Anatoli. It takes 10,000 millisieverts to join the Living Dead Club. Anatoli had received 3 million that day. Remarkably, however, he did not feel any pain. He tried going on with his day, but as a particle physicist, he knew all too well what awaited his fate was not very pleasant. And in just the next day, his face would swell up, show burn marks, and he would lose in the region where the beam entered. As symptoms worsened, Anatoli was soon admitted to an ICU, with little hope of surviving. But upon further analysis, it was seen that Anatoli had accidentally received a proton therapy, a form of cancer treatment. That may have been positive news if Anatoli indeed had some form of cancer, but that was not the case. Regardless, the conclusion from the analysis was that despite the tremendous energy of the beam, most of it was never deposited within Anatoli's brain. That is of course not to say that it did no damage, far from it. Even after recovering from the initial radiation poisoning, he kept having occasional seizures and even lost hearing on the side. Oh yeah, and half of his face stopped aging. Even at the time of writing, Anatoli Bugorski at the age of 79 is very much alive. So next time you're at the dermatologist for a lift, go ahead and save yourself some money by simply sticking your head into the nearest particle accelerator instead. But don't let Anatoli's symptoms fool you. Radiation can sometimes be good for you. Just ask the people of Chernobyl. Well, some of them anyway. There's a concept in mammalian physiology known as hormesis. Basically, it's the biological equivalent of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Now, don't take that statement like gospel just yet. For us humans, it applies to things in small doses. Perhaps the most commonly known example is that of microfractures. If you do high-impact training of some sort, you might cause microfractures on some bones in your body. The fractures are enough to initiate healing and repair, but they are usually not debilitating like an actual fracture. Over time, these fractures heal. They heal back stronger. This process is known as hormesis, and this type of a response is known as a hormetic response. Hormesis occurs in many other facets of our lives as well. Some biologists hypothesize that hormesis is exactly the reason why people should eat their vegetables, since vegetables engage a stress response in our body that causes it to fight back stronger. Cold showers are also another type of hormetic stress. These stress responses are so beneficial over the course of a lifetime that hormesis is now being studied more deeply solely for its anti-aging properties. Now, keep in mind, I said in small doses. If you run a marathon without any training, your body won't be in a position to build back stronger, even if you manage to slug your way through all 26.2 miles. If you punch a hole so hard that you break your hand into pieces, don't expect some hormetic response to grow you an extra limb. Not that you should be punching walls, but you get the point. Now, Hormesis is so extensive within our physiology that even low doses of radiation, the poisonous, deadly radiation, have been shown to induce hormesis. People around the world who live near higher, but not extreme, levels of ionizing background radiation, either due to geography or their profession, have contributed to over 3,000 research papers that have failed to find any evidence for the harmful effects of radiation under 10 centigrades. For reference, 100 centigrades per year for 7 years would lead to symptoms of chronic radiation exposure, so we're not talking about that much exposure here. Just a small dose of potentially lethal radiation. No biggie. The 9,000 or so cleanup workers at Chernobyl were exposed to around 5 centigrades. The rate of cancer deaths among these workers was actually 12% lower than the general Russian population. Twin pregnancies also received twice as many radiobiological examinations, which is something people are afraid to do due to the radiation involved. But there are studies that show that there's a considerably reduced risk of cancer for twins. Breast cancer rates were also 29% lower for mothers of twins, after being adjusted for age and financial circumstances. So, there you have it. In a literal sense, what doesn't kill you really does make you stronger. Or gives you radiation sickness. I guess it's really just a coin flip.
So, here are shower thoughts that everyone asked for, right? Well, at least some people asked for it. But you know what? No one has probably ever asked, "Where are you?" in sign language before. Actually, the phrase "where are you" was probably rarely used until relatively recently. You couldn't really talk to someone unless you were in the same vicinity as them. But wait, don't get too close. 6 feet, remember? We wash our clothes pretty often. Usually only wear things a few times before we throw them in the wash and get them cleaned up. But you know how often we sit on couches and furniture and touch other things that we just never wash? On a similar note, isn't it crazy how we essentially had to have a global pandemic that affected millions of people with a never-before-seen disease just to get everyone to start washing their hands, to grasp the most basic form of hygiene there is? If washing your hands is a new thing to you, then how disgusting has the rest of the world been before this? I miss going out to restaurants, but then I realized the utensils we use have been in the mouths of thousands of other people, and now realizing that so many people weren't washing their hands, I don't know if I miss it anymore. Coronavirus has really changed the world. If you think about it, since we're all wearing masks, we're all probably yawning a lot less since we can't see other people yawning. Actually, a lot less people are probably wearing lipstick too, huh? But the idea of makeup made me think. When an identical twin gets plastic surgery, does the other twin get offended? They're kinda saying you're ugly. They might even get pretty sad, but I just tell them, go to bed, you'll feel better in the morning. That's basically the human version of did you turn it off and back on again, right? Honestly, I just tell them that because when people get sad around me, I don't really know what to do. It's awkward. And speaking of awkward situations, why is it so awkward walking back after you bowl? Just watch. Oh yeah, these are shower thoughts. I actually just bought a cat, like last week. This is him. But while I was thinking of names, I realized that since we name our pets, your pet may have named you too. Actually, if your animal or whatever makes a specific noise whenever you come around them, that's pretty much naming you, right? Your senses are kinda crazy. Your eyes can detect nuclear fusion happening trillions of miles away. We can detect the air pressure changes caused by a paperclip hitting the floor from across the room, and my nose can detect the smallest cat hairs making me sneeze. All day long. But you know, it's fine. I'll just think about something else and move on with my day. But I was wondering, can you really think of nothing? Like actually sit there and try to think of nothing? Thinking of an empty black room? Well, that's still something. You usually can close your eyes and see nothing, but you're actually just looking at the back of your eyelids, and that's still something. So, how do you think of something that by definition is the lack of anything? How can you mentally grasp the idea of nothing? Space, though, is full of mostly nothing, and since we're talking about space, the International Space Station is about 220 miles above the surface of the Earth. But isn't the Earth itself an International Space Station? Or a Universal Space Station, if you will. Or maybe you're one of those people that believe space doesn't exist or something. I don't know, something stupid. You know, the same conspiracy theorists that believe low-quality footage of UFOs are the same people who don't believe HD footage of rocket landings. But there's still so much fake stuff that happens that's still entertaining though, right? So, what's the point in calling it reality TV if almost everyone in the world knows it's fake? We should probably get this fixed ASAP. Now, most people use ASAP to mean as soon as possible, but it could also definitely be as slow as possible, right? That's definitely an unpopular opinion though. But a lot of times, unpopular opinions aren't really unpopular opinions, they're just the least frequently openly talked about ones. I have a popular opinion though, for sure, and it's that I don't think anyone in the world likes being sung happy birthday, and no one really likes singing happy birthday. So, why do we even do it? Also, I hate captchas, they're actually so annoying. Why is the robot asking me if I'm not a robot? The great thing about artificial intelligence is that it does exactly what you want it to do. But the bad thing about artificial intelligence is that it does exactly what you want it to do. Technology can be frustrating, especially when it doesn't work the way you want it to. You know, even if phones and other electronics became waterproof, most of us will still probably subconsciously avoid getting anything wet, just out of habit. Water isn't scary, but you know what is? The ocean. All things considered, being scared of deep water is just like being scared of heights, but in water. If you're scared of heights, you probably don't want to live in a high-rise. If elevators hadn't been invented, all the CEOs and important people would probably have their offices on the first floor as a sign of status instead of the highest floor. It's kind of funny. The most massive glass towers in the world are in a way the world's tallest sand castles. They're mostly owned by big businesses. It's weird. If a small business is family-owned, people see it as friendly. But if a large company is owned by a family, it smells like corruption. Speaking of family, if you have brothers and sisters, they're just alternate versions of what could have been you. Fun fact, no Amish person has ever been cyberbullied. Alright, anyway, has anyone ever seen a taxi at a gas station before? Because I swear I've never seen one. Maybe I'll see it one day when I'm older. They say life is short, but that phrase usually encourages people to do things that'll probably make their life shorter. Life is confusing. Even your birthday itself can be confusing. Like, if you say you're born on the last day of February, it doesn't actually reveal your birthday if you think about it. Speaking of confusing things, math time. I like math, for some reason, so let me give you a tip that you might not know. Percentages are reversible. For example, 80% of 30 is equal to 30% of 80. 16% of 25 is the same as 25% of 16, or 4. Seriously, just try it out. When you were in school though, you probably wrote with a pencil on paper on a wooden desk. Or in other terms, you used a dead tree to hold a dead tree that you then used another dead tree to write on. Oh, and when you mess up, your erasers sacrifice their lives for your mistakes. Since we're all at home, at least you don't have to wake up early for school anymore. Alarm clocks are one of the only devices that make you angry in both scenarios, whether they work or not. A ton of inventions are only created to increase or prevent laziness. Speaking of laziness, most times we want to go to bed to end the day, but at the same time, we don't want tomorrow to come any quicker. Dying in your sleep sounds preferred by many people, but to me, it's kind of scary. Imagine just slipping away from existence without even knowing it. Sleeping can be kind of hard sometimes though. Some nights I lay there staring at the clock for hours on end. I wonder if there's any times in a clock I haven't seen before. By the way, is blinking the plural of winking? I also have really stupid thoughts before I go to sleep. Like, if animals saw us taking off our clothes, would they think we're shedding our skin? What even are our body parts? Teeth are such a scary and weird concept. There's dozens of bones sticking outside, well, inside of your body. And in order to prevent these bones from decaying, we have to scrub them every day. Your eyeballs won't fall out though, but they also will never actually see each other directly. Hopefully. Even your fingers are weird. Your nails are a window into the flesh of your finger. If you do happen to lose a finger, I have some good news for you. Cutting your fingernails becomes 10% easier. I hope you still have your index finger though. Clicking a computer mouse is literally sending a signal from your brain to your finger, to the computer's finger, to the computer's brain. Roughly a third of all marriages now resulted from online dating. So in a way, that means that computers and algorithms are breeding humans. But hey, shout out to computers. You gave me a job. It can be stressful sometimes, like most jobs, but monitoring incoming nuclear strikes has to be the only job in the world where you're glad it's boring. Oh, and by the way, on May 30th, 2 guys rode a dragon into space on the back of a falcon. I guess that job sounds like a little bit more fun. But you need to be smart to be an astronaut. Something I've noticed is that smart people have poor eyesight. Probably because lower graphics makes your brain run faster. IQ is just FPS. Quick question, do any of these shower thoughts even make sense? Comment your shower thoughts and maybe I'll put them in a video. Or maybe make an entire video with your comments. I don't know. But what I do know is that if you cut the corner off a piece of paper, it gains a corner. A pizza shape is round, it's delivered in a box, and you cut it into triangles. In the phrase apart, A and part are apart. But when A and part are no longer apart, they become apart. Ah yes, the English language comes in again. If you live to be 70 years old, you spent 10 years on each day of the week. You might die soon, but that's okay, because each person who has ever lived is still on this planet in some form, and that's pretty cool. Since we're on the topic of death, I was thinking about the butterfly effect the other day, and I realized you could have potentially caused a string of events that has led to someone or multiple people's death. So, does that make most people accessories to murders? Murders are legal. It's a crime, obviously. Taking a dog from its owner is a crime, but taking a dog from its family is fine. You've also never actually experienced the present. By the time your brain processes it, it's gone, and as every second goes on, your risk of dying increases. Now if you think about it, most sea animals probably don't know that humans exist. So as our risk of dying increases, we could wipe each other out eventually, and the majority of ocean life probably wouldn't even care. With the rate at which we're going, it looks like it could be pretty soon.
Wow, another shower thoughts video. Who would have guessed? Not like the last two got a million views or anything. Look, I'm just trying to make people smile, or something. You know, people say that a child's laughter can light up your home. Unless it's 3 AM and you don't have a kid. But you can escape reality sometimes, even in your dreams. For some reason, while we're asleep, our brain makes up stories only to get scared of them and then wake us up, which seems really counterintuitive. In nightmares, how does your body replicate the feeling of falling from a building when you've never actually fallen like that before? I talk about dreams a lot and how much weird stuff happens in them. But have you ever really considered the thought that you've probably done some really weird stuff in somebody else's dream at some point? They probably don't remember it though. I mean, I really don't remember any of my dreams. How many dreams can you actually remember right now? You've lost thousands of days of your memory, and that information will most likely never return to your mind. So, is what you actually remember about your life the true story? It all boils down to information, data, numbers. Speaking of numbers, 11% is both 1% and 10% more than 10%. The 60s were now 60 years ago. We're also as close to the 70s in the past as we are to the 70s in the future. Why does saying I'll be there in 18 minutes sound super specific, but saying I'll be there in 15 minutes sounds super generic? Your parents are more closely related to monkeys than you are. Something cooler though is that every single one of us has ancestors who were alive at the same time as every other human that has ever existed. We've fallen off a bit though. You know, us being attracted to people that wear glasses is kind of backwards when you consider natural selection. But you know, it doesn't really matter. Humans aren't immortal. The heart is basically a timer counting downwards until your death. Someone, somewhere, is listening to the last song they'll ever hear, or watching the last movie they'll ever watch, or getting the last haircut they'll ever receive. And there's really no way of knowing. There's a chance that the last picture of yourself you took could also end up being the one that is used for your obituary. Your life could end at any moment. It's not super often that you publicly hear about hitmen, so this either means that there aren't many of them, or that they're really, really good at their jobs. You know, how famous do you have to be to actually be assassinated as opposed to just being murdered? Like, am I not important enough? But if you are murdered, don't worry. Someone thought you were important enough to not exist anymore. So you really did mean something to someone. You lived a great life. Or maybe you didn't. Some people are optimists, others are pessimists. You know, they usually ask, are you a glass half empty or a glass half full person? Well, the easiest way to answer it is this. Did you pour water in or out of it? Or maybe it wasn't even filled with water to begin with. If things are going bad, a drink always helps. When you're drinking any alcoholic drink, both you and the drink get drunk. No matter how many failures you have in life, you're still on track to become the world's oldest person. And once you claim that title, you keep it for life. If you want to stay in the running to become the world's oldest person, you need to be healthy. But isn't being healthy technically just the slowest possible way of dying? You know, you spend your entire life collecting people for your funeral. You have no idea if you've lived 20% of your life or 90% of your life. It's weird to think about if you're closer to your birth or your death right now. Life isn't really a journey, it's more of a mission. Birthday cakes explain life pretty well. You start off not knowing what a birthday cake is, and then you figure it out. So you start getting excited for the days where you get birthday cakes. But then eventually you realize you can go out and buy your own birthday cake whenever you want. But then you realize you should probably stop eating so much cake because it's pretty unhealthy for you. Until one day you forget when your own birthday is, and cake is the last thing on your mind. You know, birthdays seem pretty simple, but they can get kind of confusing. Your first birthday is technically your second birthday, and since a baby's age is only counted after being born, is a fetus that is still inside the womb technically a negative age? Anyway, you know 3D printers, you know you have to model what you want on a computer screen, make sure everything looks good, and then eventually you go and print it out? Well, when someone's pregnant, you go from being viewed on an ultrasound monitor to being printed in the operating room. Pretty much humans are literally 3D printers. Humans aren't much different from the technology that we use. I mean, we made it. Your bed is just a wireless charger that takes anywhere from 5 to 10 hours to fully recharge a specific model of human. A lot of people have the same alarm set that you do, so there's tons of people that have the same exact reaction as you do every single morning at the same time. Your alarm is technically your life's theme song, because it starts every new episode every day. But, not gonna lie, how often do you actually wake up fully recharged? Phones and computers work perfectly fine when they're on like 30% battery. It would be really nice if humans worked the same way. But we don't. We're different. Humans are the only species that decided that water was too boring of a beverage to keep us alive. We need food to survive, just like so many other animals. By the way, when you bite down on something, you're actually biting up. Have you ever thought about the fact that your belly button is technically your old mouth? Maybe you have, but I bet you've never thought about the fact that you can go the rest of your life without eating. Or you could just eat something you're extremely allergic to, a lethal dose if you will. A lethal dose of something is also technically a lifetime supply if you think about it. Like if you're allergic to peanut butter, just eat a bunch of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. But wait, the definition of sandwich is just an item of food consisting of 2 pieces of bread with some filling in between. So, by definition, loaves of bread that you buy are really just massive bread sandwiches. We literally have to do it, but somehow we've turned liking to eat into a personality trait, just like everything else. The most obvious example is hair. Hair is annoying though. You've probably never thought about the fact that we can't hear our hair growing. We can hear music though. Sheet music is just a sound recipe. Music remixes are kind of like sound photoshops, if that makes sense. Just like turning up the volume on something is kind of like zooming in, but with sound. Our senses have turned out to be pretty useful. You can shut your eyes, close your mouth, cover your ears, pinch your nose, but you can't block out your sense of touch. Your senses are meant to protect you, and your sense of touch helps prevent you from doing things that cause harm to your body, like cutting off your limbs. No one will ever be able to chop off both of their hands with a knife. Please don't try it. Here, try this instead. Okay, how would you pronounce this? You probably said 0.6, but in reality, it's 0.60, but no one ever says that. You know, we take the easy way out a lot. We put in the least amount of effort needed into things, especially talking, texting in specific. If your is commonly written as your, then shouldn't your be written as your? Has communication gotten better or worse? We're more connected than ever, but for some reason we put the least amount of effort into communicating with each other. You know, we can communicate with our future selves in many ways, notes, videos, and so on, except we can't actually see ourselves. However, we can see our past selves, except we can't communicate with them in any way. It's kind of frustrating. Speaking of the past, remember Flappy Bird? That was 7 years ago. God, I'm old. Anyway, since we're talking about the past, you're still it from a game of tag like 10 years ago. But let's go back even further than that, like really far. Since a meteor killed off a dominant species on Earth millions of years ago, aren't we technically living in a post-apocalyptic world right now? The same thing could actually happen again.
NASA is tracking tens of thousands of near-Earth asteroids that could cause harm to the entire planet. But you're more likely to die from your cat than an asteroid, but I'm sure you'll still think they're super cute. If cats go meow and dogs go woof and ducks go quack, what's the generalized sound that humans make? Dogs are able to legally pee in more places than we are, which is funny. But here's the most depressing thing in the entire video. Most dogs have siblings they'll never see again. There's a lot that we humans don't see though. There are probably areas of Google Earth that no one has ever really zoomed into. Also, if you look at yourself in a mirror from 5 feet away, aren't you technically seeing yourself from 10 feet away? Since light takes time to travel, you're also technically looking at yourself slightly in the past. Being able to see the future would be great. Actually, do caterpillars know they're going to become butterflies, or do they just put themselves in a cocoon while having zero clue what they're doing? Most of us really don't even know what we're doing, we're just out here trying to survive. Your survival in today's world depends on whether or not you can convince people to give you money. Saying, I sold an hour of my life for $15 sounds a lot worse than I make $15 an hour. But that's the reality of the situation. Everything in life just depends on how you look at it. Like, yeah, smoking can be pretty bad. But if cigarette companies cured cancer, cigarette sales would probably increase, which makes everyone happy in the end. You could view stealing as bad, but torrenting things is the most socially acceptable form of stealing, and people do that all the time. Anyway, here's something that blew my mind. You know when people have an audition for something and their friends tell them to break a leg? I just realized they say that because they hope you end up in the cast. It all makes sense now. It's crazy how things can be interpreted differently just based off of how you say it. Saying, have a nice day to someone sounds super friendly and is pretty normal. But saying, enjoy your next 24 hours sounds threatening and will probably have them on edge for the rest of the day. Just a few words can cause a person to go from being completely calm to driving them insane. Like this. The entropy of the universe is always increasing. This means that things tend to go from being ordered to being disordered. Once you clean your room, it's basically guaranteed that it's going to eventually end up dirty again. So, even though there's chaos on Earth, like almost having another world war, or the Amazon burning down that everyone just forgot about, or the fact that there was an entire continent on fire, the fact that there's a new plague, again, it actually all makes sense. Because nothing was supposed to stay orderly to begin with. Alright, maybe I'm thinking too much at this point. And I forgot to bring a towel. What if your entire life is flashing in front of your eyes, but you're already dead? If you're not dead, but alive, everything is trying to kill you constantly. Your stomach is constantly trying to kill you. Feeding it makes it stop. You need to drink as well. Being hydrated is a necessity. Drink your water. Normally, you empty your drink from the top, but when you use a straw, you empty it from the bottom. Your lungs are also constantly trying to kill you. Breathing resets that timer too. We really take for granted the fact that most of our body's processes are automated. Aging is a disease with a 100% mortality rate. Maybe that's why aliens aren't visiting us. Maybe they should visit Antarctica though, because Antarctica is statistically the best place to have a baby, because all 11 babies born there lived, making it have a 0% infant mortality rate. It's pretty cool to think about that there are only 365 different birthdays for nearly 8 billion people. You live to be around 80, and you spend a third of your life sleeping. But when you sleep, you're just looking at the back of your eyelids for 8 hours straight. And to be honest, sleep is just a free trial of death. So we're all dead. Here's some more shower thoughts. A lot of TV shows have those fake laugh tracks in the background, so you know when to laugh at the really bad jokes. But what you don't really think about is, for the really, really old shows, while you're sitting and watching and listening to it, you're also, at the same time, probably listening to a bunch of dead people laughing. Related, one day, there are going to be more dead people on social media than there are living people. If they still exist, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube even, will be a graveyard of content and information from people who lived hundreds of years ago. It will become the biggest source of information for any event. You'll be able to see how people reacted to presidential elections, to the death of their idols, to the spread of new diseases, to everything there is. You won't be able to see how the world reacted to sliced bread though. Bread is just a loaf of dough, so by that logic, cheese is just a loaf of milk, and an ice cube is just a loaf of water. Speaking of ice, something I find kinda interesting is that there have been entire civilizations who never knew that water had a solid form. The money you earn is never actually yours. it's just your turn with it. Everyone works to survive, and all of the money that you earn actually belongs to someone else. There's a lot of jobs and businesses that bank off of the fact that things in your life can go wrong. Doctors only make money because you get sick. Mechanics make money because your car breaks down. Lawyers make money because you messed up really, really bad. Like, maybe you robbed a bank. But if you do try and rob a bank, you shouldn't have any problems with rent or food bills for the next 10 years, regardless of whether or not you're successful. A jail and a prison are basically the same thing, but a jailer and prisoner are completely different. The company Bic is known for making lighters and pens. Both of these happen to be things that are frequently stolen, which is kind of a pretty good business model if you think about it. Teachers make money off of the fact that you don't know how to, add numbers together or speak a language properly. And speaking of language, you ever just take time to think about letters and words? They're weird and confusing, but kinda cool. It takes more letters to spell the word short than it does to spell long. Also, all the E's in the word Mercedes are pronounced differently. When you say the word forward, your lips move forward. When you say the word back, your lips move back. When hurricanes form, the most dangerous part is the eye. It destroys everything in its path. It's right in the middle, which also happens to be where the letter I is in the middle of the word hurricane. It's kinda cool. Hurricanes are deadly. Everyone tends to talk about and consider the question that is, where do we go when we die? And it's a pretty good question. But no one ever asks, where are we before we were born? The world hasn't changed much over the past 700 years. Today we take pictures of food and put it on Instagram, and a lot of people get super frustrated by this. But during the Renaissance, people would sit around for weeks on end painting a table full of food. You know, you've probably walked past someone that you've played video games with online before and just didn't realize. Similarly, you see people every single day that you will never see again in your entire life. Out of every event that has happened, everything led you both to the same place at the same time, only to veer off path and never meet again. On a similar note, you've probably seen someone on the last day of their life, and you could have never known. To make this more fun though, your future wife is probably telling her boyfriend that they'll be together forever. How cute. You often hear that life is a roller coaster, and I get it, it feels like it. But when you're on a roller coaster, aren't the downhill parts the most fun? You also often hear things that are so easy a caveman could do it. The problem is that cavemen were able to start fires without lighters or matches and were able to kill animals that were 3 to 4 times their size. So, is it really that easy? If you've been using technology like computers or cell phones for years, as most of us have, you've probably scrolled for hundreds or thousands of miles. But honestly, you scrolling doesn't mean you've actually moved anything. When you scroll on your phone, nothing changes except for the color of the pixels on screen. Nothing is moving, it just seems like it. When your laptop overheats, it freezes. No British king would have this issue though, because no ruling British king has ever used the internet. Before the invention of phones, the question, where are you, was probably never asked. Eventually, when you're ordering something or sending a letter or something, you may have to put Earth as a part of your address, maybe when you can live on the moon. You've seen more of the surface of the moon with your own eyes than you will ever likely see of Earth. Actually, if you think about it, about half of the universe is in your field of view at all times. But for now, humans are on Earth. But we're weird. And a little broken. Brushing your teeth is really the only time you ever clean your skeleton. Cleaning is just rearranging dirt. Speaking of cleaning, you should probably really clean your glasses right now. They're disgusting. You really can't clean something without making something else dirty. You also can't move your top teeth. Go ahead and try. You can't hum while holding your nose shut either. Go ahead, try this one too. And while you're at it, you also can't snap your fingers inside your mouth. You ever realize that humans cut down birdhouses to make birdhouses? If you've ever clapped your hands before, you never actually stopped. There's just a really, really, really long pause between claps. We do have some redeeming qualities, I guess. We live a lot longer than most animals. If you're over the age of 30, you were alive before every single dog that is currently on Earth. We argue a lot though, over really, really stupid issues, like whether or not we should eat other animals even though we are animals ourselves. But if vegetarians don't like each other, is it still considered beef? Let's flip a coin and decide. Flipping a coin isn't really a 50-50 thing though, it's random. In a vacuum, a robot can flip a coin millions of times and get heads every single time. Humans only really use it to make decisions less stressful, even though it's a purely random event. Machine learning is becoming a bigger and bigger part of our lives every day, but you observe machine learning all the time. Your brain. Your brain is really, really good at learning things. This is shown in your dreams. Your brain can recreate scenarios with people you've known for years and just have full-on conversations with them that your brain made up on the spot. Even with people you just met, and it can all feel so real. But no one has ever dreamt about popcorn. Until it happened. And honestly, the person who discovered popcorn had to be super confused when it happened. You ever think about how arms on chairs are just like chairs for your arms? Also, if two mind readers are reading each other's minds, whose mind are they actually reading? It's weird. But what's also weird is that blue is usually seen as cold, while red is usually seen as hot. But blue fire is hotter than red fire. It's likely that another kid is going to grow up in your childhood home, and have a lot of the same experiences that you did while growing up there. They'll use every room, toilet, staircase, and light switch that you did. But why are they called light switches? At the same time, they're also dark switches. Almost everything you have ever owned is still on Earth somewhere. Unless you're Elon Musk and send your car into space. All of the materials needed to create today's technology has existed since the beginning of the Earth. It just wasn't in the right form or put together yet. You're living in an age where you can be smarter than almost anyone in the past 2 million years. You can be smarter than almost all 100 billion people who have ever lived. You have the world's information at your fingertips. But you'd rather sit here and listen to me tell you what I think about in the shower. I'm flattered, really. But please get out of my house before I call the cops. Not gonna lie, the world is kind of funny when you step back and really think about it. In a day and age where everyone takes everything seriously, it's nice to pause and consider the intriguing and, sometimes, flat out just weird thoughts that some of us have, but for the most part never share. Some of them are pretty interesting, like the fact that the Earth's population has doubled in the past 50 years, but it took almost 2 million years to get to the 3.7 billion human population in 1971. For every person alive today, there's about 15 dead people throughout all of human history. Or that one day, in the far future, someone will be the very last person to die of cancer. Others are honestly just annoying. You normally breathe and blink on autopilot, but now since I just mentioned it, you're doing both of them manually. Sorry, by the way. Or the fact that your tongue is probably touching the top of your mouth right now, but no matter where you put it, it just doesn't feel comfortable. Why do women's pants have fake pockets, but babies' pants have real pockets? These are shower thoughts. Whether you have these thoughts in the shower, or in the car while you're in traffic, or when you're laying in bed for hours at night when you just can't sleep, the location doesn't matter. The Earth is revolving around the Sun is revolving around the center of our galaxy, and our galaxy is in a unique orbit with the nearest galaxy to our own, Andromeda. So, with that being said, every single second, the Earth is moving into a new position in space that it has never been before, and will never return to again. Ever. Your age in years is how many times you've circled the sun, but your age in months is how many times the moon has circled you. If you could steal just a second of life from everyone on Earth, you'd be able to survive for nearly another 240 years. But did you know that two people can be born at the same exact time, but because of time zones, have different birthdays, or even be born in different years? Maybe there is no reason as to why we're here. Or at least, that's what we're supposed to think. Maybe we're just characters in a universe-sized video game. Sleep could be a save point, which is why we really don't know what happens between the second we fall asleep and when we eventually regain consciousness some hours later. We also trust our bodies enough to just go unconscious and continue breathing so we don't die. If you think about it, it's actually healthy and recommended to sleep for 4 months a year. But in order to bring us back, alarm clocks are made for the sole purpose of being annoying enough to shake humans into consciousness. You might want to smash it and break it, but don't. Every analog clock that no longer works actually shows the time on it where it died. If you order a new clock to be delivered to you and it arrives safely, your time has arrived. Speaking of being conscious humans, there's a lot that goes on inside our bodies. Your brain makes your heart work, and your heart makes your brain work. It's really quiet given the things that are going on inside us right now. Like, imagine if you could hear blood gushing through your veins, or if every time we blinked, it made a noise. But wait, if everyone on the planet blinked at the same exact time, nobody would be able to tell that it just happened. We have eyes to see, we have a nose to smell. We have ears to hear and hands to feel, and we have a mouth to taste. But is this every sense that there is? Could there be other senses that we just can't perceive because we don't have the means to? We just haven't evolved to need them because it's not needed on Earth. But what about on other planets? When we colonize Mars, will the far future humans evolve to have different senses than we do today? Evolution is an interesting idea. The voice inside your head has also evolved with you over time. Do you remember if it was the voice of a kid when you were younger? If you heard your 8-year-old voice today, would you recognize it? Being able to record things digitally is something that we all overlook. We view old writing like the Wealth of Nations, or the Bible, or the Epic of Gilgamesh, and we see them as some of the most influential pieces of writing to ever exist. But in the year 3000, we'll be able to look back at 1,000-year-old videos and recordings just like we view old writing today. If you're watching this, by the way, hello. But due to deepfakes and people getting really good at editing and faking things, there's only going to be a very brief period in human history where videos can actually be trusted as evidence. People see glasses as a sign of intelligence for some reason, even though we all failed a test in order to get them. But you know, Antarctica is probably the smartest and most educated continent on Earth, considering it's populated almost exclusively by scientists. Science has taught us a lot about the universe, about the planet we live on, and even what goes on inside our bodies. One of the most interesting things that we figured out, though, is that the brain is the only organ that knows it's actually an organ. And on top of that, it actually named itself. But the brain takes time to process information. It's very quick, but not instantaneous. So technically, your body is living ever so slightly in the future. We live in a society, and we set up and made rules that everyone should follow in order to keep things going smoothly. But some of them are just kind of funny. For example, parking tickets are just speeding tickets for going 0 miles per hour where it isn't allowed. We have cars that can go upwards of 200 miles an hour, but there's almost nowhere where you're legally allowed to go that fast in them. In life, people always tell you to stay in school and don't do drugs. But when you get sick, the best advice you get is to be told to do drugs and stay out of school. You never truly appreciate the fact that you can breathe through your nose until you're sick and suddenly lose half the ability to keep yourself alive. Everyone has taken medicine and seen a warning label to not operate heavy machinery while on the use of it. Now, they're probably talking about cars and such, but almost everyone immediately thinks of like a forklift, or a crane, or a Caterpillar 797F. Speaking of cranes though, have you ever actually seen a crane being built? They kinda just show up out of nowhere and then disappear randomly. Language is just weird. I made a whole video about it a couple weeks ago. Try to think of another English word that ends in MT other than dreamt. I more closely represent the letter X as a math variable as opposed to it being a real letter. It's just a fake Z anyway. Crane is the 9,618th most used word in the English language. But you really don't need to know that many words to speak English well. Learning the top 100 words in most languages will usually contain at least 50% of the words you use in everyday conversation. Bring this up to 500 words, and you'll get to around 80%. This should allow you to go out in public and order food without an issue. But when you're at a restaurant and you're waiting for a waiter, you become the waiter. On the topic of food, food also doesn't really go bad, just something else starts eating it before you do. Bacteria. Also, I was in a public restroom the other day and it had one of those touch-free soap dispensers. I don't really get the point of those though, because as long as the soap does its job, like to remove the bacteria from my hands, does it really matter if I touch the dispenser or not? But one of the nastiest things there is out there is what you might be watching this video on right now, a phone. Most people check their phones nearly 100 times a day, and I don't remember the last time that I thoroughly washed off my phone. There's so many things that you can do on a phone, there's almost unlimited possibilities. Cell phone providers take advantage of this and sell unlimited minutes, unlimited texts, and unlimited data for any given month. But in reality, you're actually only getting 44,600 minutes a month at most. So they're kind of lying, but not really. There's about 730 hours in a month. If you work a full-time job, you're going to be working at least 40 hours a week, or 160 hours a month. It's all worth it though whenever that check comes in. But sometimes, you spend money you don't have. In a way, debit cards pay for things with the past hours of your life, and credit cards pay for things with the future hours of your life. But if you don't pay your taxes, you'll get thrown in jail. But jails are typically funded with taxpayer money. So if you go to jail for tax evasion, you're living off of taxes because you didn't pay taxes. Taxes are like a subscription fee to your country that you can't cancel, even if you don't like the service. The only reason we want or feel the need to make money is to get rid of all of it in the end. For a very brief second, every 19-year-old is the oldest teenager in the world. In the same way, every single person alive was, at one point, the youngest person in the entire world. But even more interesting than both of these is the fact that, for the smallest period of time, you were exactly pi years old. Walking is just you continuously screwing up your balance so you fall into your other leg, and the process repeats until you reach your destination. Knocking on someone's door is basically punching their house until they give you attention. Similarly, clapping is just giving yourself a high five for someone else's hard work. Clapping is universally a pretty good thing. It's a way to show your appreciation for something without someone having to see you face to face. Facial expressions are something that we kind of just don't notice day to day, but they're pretty interesting. Your skull doesn't change shape at all. Your skin, your flesh, just warps and bends in ways to form a smile, or a frown, or anything else. Actually, you've never even truly seen your own face before. You've only viewed it in pictures or in reflections. The rich used to pay the poor for their entertainment, but today, the poor pay the rich for entertainment. Now, you don't always pay, like YouTube is a thing, but YouTube itself is older than some people watching this video. Watching videos, though, is just being entertained by super tiny pixels changing colors and turning on and off. So to be honest, existence is just really weird. There are only 2 days in your entire lifetime that aren't 24 hours long. The day you're born, and the day you die. So, hurry those showers up. You're using all my hot water.
How many sides does a piece of paper have? I'll give you a second. 2?
No.
It's actually 6. You don't realize it until you start stacking it. There's a lot of things in life that take us by surprise. A lot of things that aren't really as they seem. Like elephants being herbivores. They'd be a lot more scary if they were carnivores. Your parents told you not to talk to strangers. Yet, here we are. When you're talking or conversing with someone online, a lot of times you don't really know that much about them. The nice thing about not knowing anyone's age on the internet is that you can pretty much get in an argument with an 8-year-old and leave feeling superior. That serotonin boost can be exactly what you need some days. A lot of us could use a boost of those happy chemicals to make our lives a lot easier. When you experience depression, your brain refuses to produce, let's call it, a happy hormone, as a reward for your brain cells doing what they're supposed to do. And, as a result, your cells go on strike, refusing to work for no pay, and the whole system comes crashing down, benefiting absolutely nobody involved. Sounds strikingly familiar. History repeats. And speaking of history, it must have been really awkward being the first historian to have ever existed. I can just imagine that conversation happening. It's like, so, what are you doing? Just writing down everything that's been happening. Why? But the way we view history is now changing. At some point, the internet will be older than all humans alive, and future generations will have tons of high-quality video footage of so many extinct animals, old civilizations, and where Santa used to live before the Arctic melted and disappeared. That might make you feel like an old doomer, but remember, the number of people older than you never increases. It only decreases. It's like a lifelong race to be ranked number 1, except the prize for winning is just death. And out of the billions of people who have ever lived, just one of them suffered the most agonizing death of us all. So far. But maybe that happened hundreds of years ago. Until trains were invented in 1804, every human who ever lived that experienced a speed upwards of 56 miles per hour was falling to their death. Normally, the floor is what stops gravity from killing us. But if we get too far away from it, gravity uses the floor to kill us. Life is short, so they say. But life is only short if you love your life. Otherwise, it is very, very painfully long. It's like playing a game. In this case, it'd be more painful to lose the game by 1 point than by 100 points. You know what I mean? But enough with being morbid. Good dreams are basically a free trial of a life you could have been living. But in a way, if there are an infinite number of universes, then our dreams aren't actually dreams. They're clips and previews from another universe that we can see into. But our universe isn't so bad. Being able to go to sleep without worrying that you'll get eaten by some random animal is probably the most privileged thing about our modern world. It wasn't always like that, so we should really appreciate it. We don't really appreciate a lot of free things in life, like taking your health for granted all the time. Until you're sick. Only then do you actually care. Oh, and email. We take our own planet for granted almost daily. National parks are a perpetual reminder of what the world would look like if it weren't for humans. Ironic how we enjoy them so much, isn't it? I just blinked, and most of the time, we barely even notice how often we blink. Characters in first-person video games never blink, if you think about it. It doesn't feel like much. It's just one of those manual processes that our bodies do for us that we just forget about. We really take for granted how smooth the insides of our eyelids are. Imagine if they were like sandpaper. Us humans can barely live with one another without trying to kill each other. So the fact that people can convince themselves that meeting aliens would go smoothly is nothing short of pure hopium. If they got upset with us, they'd just throw another one of those big rocks at Earth and we'd be toast. And speaking of big rocks, the asteroid that ended the dinosaurs' reign on Earth was technically the highest ratio of killing birds to one stone in Earth's history. From all the life on land to all the life in Earth's oceans, 99% of everything was wiped out in an instant. We are part of that remaining 1%. I liked that quote so much, I put it on a hoodie. You can get it here. Still, the deep ocean is terrifying. People will swim in ocean at the beaches, even though there are definitely many corpses in it. People will not swim in a pool with a corpse in it though. So, therefore, as weird as it sounds, humans all have a corpse-to-water ratio that is acceptable for them to swim in. You can see why people don't like oceans now, huh? Water makes fabric a darker shade even though water is clear. I guess I probably should have taken my clothes off before I got in the shower. Anyway, after I shower, I normally brush my teeth, and I'm super grateful to be able to do that. Most animals have never seen their own teeth, let alone be able to clean them. As much as you'd like to believe it, wisdom teeth aren't useless. They're actually the reason some oral surgeons are able to make a living. It's quite the career. It's weird. We choose our careers when we're worst informed about what they're actually like. Some people will work the same job for their entire life, wondering what life could have been like if they had taken a slightly different path. Who knows? You could have ended up like Jeff Bezos and had more money than brain cells. Literally. 200 billion is a massive number. There's a certain point in everyone's life where how high can you count changes from a matter of knowledge to a matter of will. And I wouldn't attempt this one. Counting to 200 billion would take you over 6,000 years. Our brains just aren't capable of even comprehending things that large. It's strong, but not the strongest. Yes, the brain did indeed name itself, but it also recognized that it named itself and was surprised when it realized that. So are we actually as smart as we think we are? We can't see into the future. Unfortunately, we aren't psychic. But always remember, psychics that don't accept walk-in appointments aren't real psychics. They'd be expecting them, right? But although we can't see the future, we do remember the important events that happened in our lives in the past. Some stranger somewhere still remembers you because you were kind to them when no one else was. You've made an impact in their life. You made them feel something no one else could. However, almost universally, you can instantaneously stress out any person just by shouting, "Hey, catch." That was uncalled for, and I'm sorry for that. Getting hit in the face by a ball at that speed would most definitely have you in the hospital. The hospital is simultaneously the building where most people leave without entering, and also the building where most people enter without leaving. We're born against our will. We also die against our will. But regardless, we're here. We're alive. Kids don't really enjoy sleeping. It's always seemed like a hassle to get them to finally go down. It's probably because they haven't gotten bored of life yet. They're young and may be here against their will, but there's still so much to see, so much to do. Kids are all different, but they all have one thing in common. They're brutally honest. The easiest way to tell if you're obese is to ask a kid to draw you. If they draw your stick figure with a line for the body, you're probably fine. However, if they draw you with a circle, I got some bad news for you. You can be underweight or you can be overweight, but you can't be weight. We all change as we age. We grow and we mature. This can be seen in many ways. There was a moment where your mom or dad picked you up as a baby and put you down, only to never pick you up again. You got big, you grew up. If you're still decently young, the odds are that you still haven't met the majority of people who you'll befriend in life. And those are the same people who will inevitably be at your funeral when the lights go out one last time. As sad as it sounds, most guys will receive their first bunch of flowers at their funeral. Go buy your friend a flower. I'm sure he'll appreciate it. If you happen to be older, however, and you go to college at an old enough age, the odds of you taking a history class that are simply life events you experienced is actually quite high. If you happen to be in English class, however, I wish you the best of luck. I understand how English can be difficult to learn. I've always said this. Though only one letter apart, creation and cremation are two very opposite things. And somehow the old you is actually your younger self. It can sometimes seem like it's completely backwards. It reminds me of passwords. Passwords have probably stopped more people from getting into their own accounts than hackers, having the opposite effect that it was intended to have. Protecting your belongings is important, even if you're protecting yourself from you, apparently. Funny enough, there are locks in a police locker room to prevent theft. These are the people we call when our houses get broken into, and yet they can't even stop themselves from stealing from each other. If a cop gets caught stealing, does he, by law, have to arrest himself? Hopefully they'd be on house arrest, because people who were sentenced to house arrest in 2020 really lucked out timing-wise, because we all were too. Luck would have been on your side, and for most, luck is hard to come by. Gambling is only considered an addiction if you're bad at it. Otherwise, you're considered a lucky degenerate. At least you're rich though. But if someone tells you you look like $1 million, don't get an ego. It's less and less of a compliment every year because of inflation. Regardless, plenty of people have struck it rich based purely off of coincidence and luck. Sometimes it doesn't take that much. A lot of Google's revenue comes from people that are just too lazy to type .com after the end of their search. Coincidences can either make us look really, really good or really, really bad. For example, a guy walking around with 1 crowbar is a lot more suspicious than a guy walking around with 3 crowbars. School zones have a very specific speed that you need to be driving at. Drive too slow and you're really creepy, but drive too fast and you start wondering why the speed bumps are screaming. Okay, sorry, that was a pretty distasteful joke. It's a guilty pleasure. We all have guilty pleasures, but to be honest, every pleasure is a guilty pleasure if you're anxious enough. Anxiety sucks. We've all experienced it at some point or another, and it can really get in the way of so many things in life. Your work, your free time, even your relationships. It doesn't matter how many fish there are in the sea if you don't know how to fish, you know? The night before you have a day off is like 100 times better than the actual day off itself, because you're already worrying about the next day when you have to go back. Anxiety gets in the way of everything. But no matter how anxious or lonely you get, just know that somewhere out there, there's a lonely piece of paper that's been in the same printer tray for years and years on end, simply because new paper is always loaded on top of it before the rest runs out. Everyone and everything has a purpose, except that piece of paper. So don't let it get you down. You've survived every battle you've gone through. You're undefeated. In the end though, we're all losers in the race of time. Time is limited, so make the most of it. Me personally, I'll be seeing if I can make a slinky go down an escalator forever. It might be a waste of time, Actually, it is a waste of time. But I'll be happy. And that's all that matters. I think. Extinction level events have killed up to 99% of all living things that have ever existed. Embrace the 1%. Being in lockdown has given us time. It's given us time to think, to ask questions, and to consider things that we might not have given a second thought to if we weren't stuck inside with nothing else to do. Things like traffic lights, for example. We look at them every single day. Maybe not as much this past year, but the traffic light is honestly one of man's greatest inventions. It has made road transport a lot safer and easier to navigate, without requiring manual labor. It's genius. But honestly, it's not so smart. Think about it. Why are the two main colors of the traffic light red and green, when those are the two colors that most colorblind people can't differentiate? Speaking of traffic, now that most of us have been working from home, the "I was stuck in traffic" excuse for coming in late sadly can't work anymore. But no worries, I'm guessing the new version is just saying my Wi-Fi was out. You know, Uber drivers have honestly become essential workers during this pandemic. Thanks to them, people can get to where they need to be without having to worry about coming in contact with loads of people in public transport. But while their work is important, driving an Uber is a really weird job. Because although their job literally revolves around them sitting in a car all day, they still always have to walk to work. And I'll be honest with you guys, I've spent most of this lockdown sitting in my room playing video games, which got me thinking a lot about how much the characters on our screen tell us about the real world. Like oftentimes, we're told that life is a game. Well, if that's true, does that mean that pregnant women are game developers? In most role-playing games, you have the main character, the side character, and the non-playable characters, or NPCs. In real life, you are the main character in your life, a side character in the life of your friends, and an NPC in the lives of all the strangers you meet. Well, don't meet along the way. All we can really do is try to be the best character we can be, whether we're front and center or just somewhere in the background. Because at the end of the day, you don't know how much your role, as tiny as it might seem, can affect someone else's plotline. But moving away from screens, let's go back to the basics. Board games. Everyone knows Jenga, but it's a bit different from most games. In most games, you have one winner and multiple losers. But in Jenga, you have one loser and multiple winners. We often like to think that we're without any prejudice and we always judge things fairly. But just look at the way we treat moths versus the way we treat butterflies, and you'll understand what pretty privilege is. By the way, did you guys know that Barbie has more movies than the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe? Don't ask me how I know that. Human milk is one of the few things that almost every single human being on the planet has tasted, but also the one thing that no one remembers the taste of. Unless... If you just laughed, you got the joke. But if you waited too long, it's probably not funny anymore. Every joke has a hidden timer, and if you don't laugh before that timer expires, it's no longer funny. So let's try this again, but this time, make sure you laugh before the timer runs out. When I was younger, I used to love waiting for the tooth fairy. It was the one chance I got to sell my body without Child Protective Services knocking on my parents' door. I woke up one morning and I watered my houseplants, and then I looked outside and I saw the trees, just flowing in the wind. And I thought to myself, these trees look a lot more comfortable than us. Come rain or sunshine, they just stand there, doing their thing. Which made me realize, man's greatest problems are caused by our intelligence, which is also what solves most of our problems. I guess it's just the cycle of life. Bird watching as a hobby increased by 37% during the pandemic. It's not that the birds suddenly increased in number or just started showing up on more windows, it's just that because we had pretty much nothing else to do, we were able to slow down and actually pay attention to the world. And well, some of the things we found are really interesting. When we wake up in the morning, we often cuss out under our breaths at the thought of having to go to work so early. What if birds chirping early in the morning are doing the same thing? And one day, what if all the birds rise up and sue Jack for using their bodies as the Twitter logo without paying them anything? There's an estimated 400 billion birds in the world. 1 versus 400 billion. Who wins? Parrots are basically nature's very own tape recorder, and the pigeons on your street probably miss you. Not humans in general, you in particular, because pigeons can actually distinguish human faces. but to be honest, I'm pretty sure most people couldn't even identify a pigeon. If you haven't figured it out already, nature is weird and gives us loads of things to think about. Like, why are humans scared of getting bitten by spiders when we have more teeth than them? And why are spiders scared of getting stepped on by humans when they have more legs than us? Why are our bodies full of bacteria that literally wait decades for us to die just so they can eat us? But of all the weird things in nature, octopuses are definitely one of the most intriguing. In the blink of an eye, octopuses can change their skin color and texture to match their surroundings underwater, perfectly blending into their background. The mimic octopus, in particular, can also change how it moves in the shape of its tentacles to impersonate more than 15 underwater animals. Learning about these creatures made me think, what if there are other animals or sea creatures that are so much better at camouflaging than the octopus? Don't get me wrong, the octopus's camouflage mechanism is incredible, but the fact that we know what it still looks like originally means that it might not be doing the absolute best job. So in reality, there might be other animals that are so good at camouflaging that we just haven't noticed them yet. For some reason, lemons, limes, lemon soda, lime soda, and lemon lime soda all taste completely different from one another. And since we're on the topic of fruits, a fresh fruit salad is a modern technological wonder that is often overlooked. Think about it. At what point in human history could you ever have one spoon that contained fruits from multiple countries, climates, and even continents? Definitely not before major technological advancements like refrigeration. Soon, these same technological advancements will drive us past the use of gas-powered vehicles, pun intended. And once gas-powered vehicles become archaic, the term gas pedal will also become archaic. But it'll still hang around as a symbol of the accelerator, just like the floppy disk is still the save logo for most things. The future is really fun to think about, because you can have 1,000 guesses and still be wrong. But still, it's fun to think about what the world might be in a not-so-distant future. Right now we have Google Earth, but soon we might have Google Moon and Google Mars too. All of this talk of Mars and the Moon reminds me of the 7 humans aboard the International Space Station. It basically takes the smartest people on Earth and stops them from being the smartest people on Earth. It basically turns the most brilliant minds humanity has to offer into a couple of space janitors, which is great. These are literally some of the greatest engineers and pilots on the entire planet. But you know, that space toilet isn't going to scrub itself. Everyone says practice makes perfect, but in reality, that's a lie. Doctors have been writing their whole lives, but still end up writing a prescription like they're 3-year-old kids who can't hold a crayon. This shows that mindlessly doing something a million times in a row doesn't make you any better than a kid coloring outside of the lines for the 1,000th time in a row. In reality, it takes conscious effort into trying to improve to actually improve at something. But hey, don't feel bad about your handwriting. On the bright side, you have your own unique font. The future is bright, there's light at the end of the tunnel, darkest before dawn. We have all these great quotes that tell us to be hopeful about the future. In their hearts, all of these quotes are great as they give us something to look forward to. But in reality, when you think far enough into the future, it's hard to see a lot of bright spots. It's crazy to think about it now, but in a not-so-distant future, the term artificial intelligence and robot might be considered offensive to beings which have become indistinguishable from humans. But don't worry guys, if they were to ever wage war on us, we can always send decoded messages to each other in the form of captchas. The internet is filled with some of the most beautiful creative works of all time, but in just a few years, most of the content on the internet will have been produced by dead people. Think a little further ahead, and you'll realize that sadly, all of humanity will cease to exist one day. Sometimes I catch myself drifting into these weird thoughts and I ask myself, am I just being paranoid, or am I carefully observing the world around me? And the truth is, the answer depends on how correct I am. If my thoughts are right, I get called observant. If my thoughts are wrong, I get called paranoid. At the end of the day, it's just a matter of perspective. The fitness industry has skyrocketed since the start of the pandemic. Because everyone now has all this time on their hands, a lot of people are trying to put more effort into their health, exercising being the biggest step for most. However, for a lot of these people, it doesn't last very long. They start very strongly, but after a while, they get tired, lose the fire, and give up. But don't feel too bad about it. You have the same amount of gold medals as the majority of people who go to the Olympics. Remember, it's all perspective. Before lockdown, telling people to not be on their phones all day was great advice. But in the past year, That basically means telling them to quit their jobs, stop communicating with the outside world, and start making friends with the squirrels and lizards that are running around their backyard. Statistically speaking, we as a species are getting better. We're becoming more tolerant. We're standing up for our rights. We're learning to settle disputes without launching nukes at each other. Overall, we're generally becoming nicer to one another. Yes, we still have a long way to go, but I applaud our journey thus far. But sometimes, it feels like our generation thinks they're doing so much more than any other generation did to change things for the better, when in reality, only future generations can say whether that's the case or not. There is light at the end of the tunnel still. The future is indeed bright. Maybe not a few billion years from now, but in the meantime, we're moving forward. The vaccines are rolling out, and it seems that a good chunk of the population is happy to get it. In time, it may appear as if nothing happened in the first place, because once this pandemic is completely over, we can all come out of our homes, hug one another, and tell each other we made it. And it really makes sense that Future's name is Future, because Mask Off is about to take on a whole different meaning. This is a red circle. It's also the flag of Japan. It's also a pie chart showing how much of Japan is Japan. It's 100% by the way. You know, your perspective is everything, and in a way, reality can be whatever you want it to be. Neuroscience is the study of the brain, by the brain. It's the study of the brain learning about itself. Claustrophobic people don't like the feeling of being trapped in a small place with no way out. But if you think about it, your brain is trapped in your skull, but you're completely fine with that. Your reality is literally all in your head. Your hands are really just your brain's personal servants to interact with what it perceives to be real. That begs the question, how can we know what exists outside of our subjective experiences if we can't ever step outside of our own head? It's simple. We can't. If the universe is a simulation, it might explain my insomnia. There just might not be any room left on the sleeping server. But even then, the only way you can know you've fallen asleep is by waking up. You have absolutely no idea what happens to you while you're unconscious at night. You sleep for 8 hours a day, meaning you're recharging your body for a third of your entire life. We're really poor batteries, and as with all battery-powered things, we degrade over time. Chargers are honestly just life support for our electronics. Eventually, everything comes to an end. You've probably made multiple decisions that have saved your life without you ever realizing it. But that's not exactly true. It's impossible to save a life. You can only delay a death. It can be scary. We all want to know our purpose in life. But maybe it's better we don't. A cow wouldn't want to know its purpose. Life is actually just generations of kids disciplining other kids hoping that the next group does just a little bit better. Humans aren't eternal. At least not yet. The odds of you dying at any moment are pretty slim, but it's never 0%. We all think humans are the dominant species on Earth, but what if plants were just farming us, giving us the necessary oxygen we need to survive, until about 100 years later when we ultimately die? Our bodies get thrown back into the soil, where plants can then consume us. This is how nature recycles. Death is the end of an old life, decomposition is the beginning of new life. Everyone in the world, even you, is producing carbon dioxide, which plants need to grow to produce oxygen, which we need to survive. So if anyone says you're useless, just know you're helping keep everyone else alive just by existing. It's all a cycle. There's order to all the chaos. Since plants and animals are mostly made of water, the evolution of all life is really the story of planets developing oceans, and then eventually, watching those oceans get up and start walking around. Another way to look at it is, since all living things are made up of the same stuff that stars are in roughly the same proportions, the evolution of intelligent life is basically stars watching their siblings fall apart, then their corpses getting back up and trying to learn about themselves. It sounds insane. Because it is. Everything can sound crazy if you word it the right way. Like for example, when you're reading, you're literally looking at a dead tree and hallucinating. Every book you've ever read is just a remix of the dictionary, and if you touch your phone in just the right places, someone comes and brings you a pizza. But that's a really small amount of actions taken. There exists a set of finite actions that, if you perform them in the correct order, would make you a millionaire in just a single day. You just don't know what they are. $1 million is a lot of money, but $1 billion? It's almost inconceivable. For example, if you had $1 for every year that the universe has existed, approximately 13.8 billion years, you wouldn't even make the top 50 on the Forbes list. Speaking of Forbes listers, it's interesting that the 2 richest people on our planet are actively building businesses to build rockets to get off this planet. But you know, the richest person on Earth is technically also the richest person in the universe, since our definition of rich is owning a lot of Earth money, and there's no way for extraterrestrial life to obtain it. Or is there? For all we know, humanity could have colonized other planets, other solar systems, and just left some of us on Earth as an experiment. Maybe one day, they'll return. Or maybe they won't. If these future humans were ever desperate for DNA from the past, there's a potentially viable source in all the bodies frozen on the trail near the top of Mount Everest. We've done pretty well, I think. I mean, we're still alive at least. But to be honest, we've gotten pretty lucky. You know how babies are like constantly being loud, crying, screaming, or whatever? How do humans survive in the wild with that constant alarm going off all day? It really only gets worse the more there are. The first parents to ever have identical twins must have been really confused. As kids, 99.9% of the times we cried was due to physical pain. As adults though, 99.9% of the times people cry is due to emotional pain. Emotions can be hard to make sense of at times. Hospitals are a good example. In a hospital, you can find people experiencing the worst, the happiest, the first or the last days of their lives. There's plenty of tears shed, in both the best and worst ways possible. But whether you're welcoming a new life or saying goodbye to an old one, some things never change. The number of people older than you never increases. Your right elbow is and will forever remain untouched by your right hand, and the English language will forever be confusing. Have you ever realized that the words short, shorter, and shortest are actually just the long, longer, and longest versions of the word short? Bread goes into the toaster as a slice, but comes out as a piece. English makes me want to light my house on fire. But wait, nothing is ever on fire. It's fire that is on things. But don't worry, you can put the fire out by putting the right things on fire. Got it? Good. Wait, now it's too dark in here. Now that I think about it, dark is written with a K instead of a C, probably because we can't see in the dark. We aren't afraid of being alone in the dark. We're afraid of the exact opposite, actually. Even when you think you're alone, you're not. People cover the webcams on their computer because they're paranoid someone might be watching them. But yet, no one ever covers their cell phone cameras. You're connected to everything, to everyone. If you live in the United States, the driveway to your house is in one way or another connected to every other driveway in the country. And I guess in the same way, you could also say that your toilet is somehow connected to everyone else's toilet through the sewer system, which is kinda cute. Everyone needs a toilet buddy. Your parents always told you, don't talk to strangers, but the only way to make friends is to literally talk to strangers. Honestly, a lot of your social life was entirely predetermined by where your teachers assigned you to sit in class. We even grew up being told not to take candy from strangers, right? So why in any world does Halloween exist? To do just the thing we've been saying not to do? I understand though, you need to be careful with who you interact with. For all you know, you could be knocking at a serial killer's doorstep. If a serial killer is chasing you, you're both literally running for your life. I hope you're quick, but don't run too fast. You might start sweating. If you're wearing a sweater and you start sweating, doesn't that make you the sweater? Okay, we're back on English, never mind. I would tell you to go inside and cool off, but using solar panels to power your AC is like using the sun's power against itself, and I don't think picking a fight with the sun is the best idea. Given the vastness of space and the massive amount of stars in the universe, if you randomly drew some stars on a page, your drawing is probably a very accurate representation of some particular cluster of stars in the sky. I guess you're just a natural-born artist, a modern-day Picasso. Our perception of time is really warped sometimes. Picasso was alive when the Titanic sank, but at the same time, he was also alive to witness the first moon landing on television. We see these things, these people, as having existed in different times, but in reality, it was a lot more recent than you actually think. But this reminds me, the light of the moon is just a reflection of the sun, right? So, how come vampires don't burn at night? Something is off here. The world is constantly moving. I myself have never been to India, China, or Bangladesh, but about 70 to 80% of all my clothes have. Belts, though, are probably some of the dirtiest items of clothing. People always touch them after they've used the bathroom. But think about it. When was the last time you washed a belt? Yeah. Doing laundry sucks, but I had an idea while doing mine today. If you just put a bunch of brains in a washing machine, is that considered brainwashing? And since we're on the topic of being brainwashed, someone, somewhere in the world, has probably dreamed about being in a relationship with you before. And in my case, I just feel really bad for them. That was probably a nightmare. But hey, every time you meet someone in real life, your dreams pretty much unlock a new character, so you can live the rest of your life out with them to the fullest extent. Until that alarm goes off.
Somewhere on Earth, in a random corner of the world, well, actually the Earth is round, so there aren't really corners, but in a random corner of the world, there's a worm. Just a single worm. And he holds the world record for digging deeper into the Earth than any other worm that has ever lived. And to him, I say congratulations. Now, when I'm not sitting in my room thinking about worms, I'm trying to see the world for what it could be, not what it is at the moment. But a lot of times I realize, wait, I can't see. Where are my glasses? And you know, for those of us out there who wear glasses, we're actually blessed. I hate cleaning my glasses, but the amount of dirt and smudges that end up on them is literally a visual representation of what could have ended up in your eye. So our eyes may not work properly, but at least they're clean, right? And you know, speaking of our body, there's a lot going on that we just don't really realize. Like, for example, your body is constantly 3D printing your hair, 24/7, 365. And now because of quarantine, the average hair length across the world's population is slowly increasing, day by day. Unless you're bald, and, well, I'm sorry for that. And like, you know your nose? Sneezing can get pretty frustrating. You get right to the edge and it's just gone. By the way, the next time that happens to you, just stare into the light. No, not that one. Really anything but that. Sneezing is just really weird. Other than the nasty gunk that flies out of your nose, it also seems to defy the laws of physics. Why are our heads propelled forward when we sneeze instead of backwards? You'd imagine that they work like thrusters, but they just don't. Anyways, back to physics. It's kind of mind-blowing that nowadays it's much easier for humans to leave our planet, to go to outer space, than it is to reach the deepest place on Earth, the Marianas Trench. If the ocean was crystal clear, people with a fear of heights would never board a cruise ship, because it's pretty much the same thing, right? But you don't have to leave Earth to have a good time. If you happen to live in a so-called third world country, just know that that term doesn't really make much sense. We're all on Earth, the third planet or world from the sun, so doesn't that make every country on Earth a third world country? Earth is pretty rare though, for many reasons. For one, life. We may not be the only ones, but from how it's looking right now, we're the only ones around here at least. We see diamonds as precious and valuable jewelry, but things like amber are far rarer than any diamond you could find. Amber is made from trees, and trees are living, breathing things, something that, at least as far as we've looked, we can't find elsewhere. However, there are literally planets where it rains diamonds. On a galactic scale, the very things that we see as valuable and exquisite are quite common, but things that we overlook daily are much, much rarer than you actually think. You get about 80 years on this planet, and depending on where you live and the life you lead, that number may vary. In a way, the average life expectancy and average Wi-Fi speed are directly correlated if you think about it. But imagine if, when your time comes and life slowly fades away, a question pops up, giving you two options. 1. Respawn into a new life with no memories. Or 2. Respawn into a new life with memories. If you choose option 2, perhaps deja vu and that gut feeling you get come from these past memories of your past lives. Maybe. Something I think about a lot is the fact that when the first human came into existence and made its way to the land, that we will never know if, when it looked up into the sky, did it see the sun or the moon first. You know, something interesting is that when you look at the moonlight reflecting off the water, you're seeing light from plasma reflected off a solid that was then refracted by a gas and then ultimately reflected by a liquid. All forms of matter coming together, and you probably haven't even thought about it before. It's kinda cool. Speaking of liquids,
It's odd how humans sweat when they're hot, but objects, like your cup, sweat when they're cold. And now that I think about it, the first humans to ever see a total solar eclipse probably thought the world was ending. And then like 20 minutes later when it went away, probably experienced the most relieving feeling anyone has ever felt. Speaking of the end of the world, there have been plenty of extinction level events throughout Earth's history. They've all killed anywhere from 50 to 90% of all living things. Imagine all the foods, fruits, and other things that were completely wiped out of existence. It doesn't matter because we could just look at it though. Your tongue somehow knows exactly how everything you look at will feel. And also, you don't really fully understand how strong you chew until you accidentally bite your cheek. Do we really need to chew that hard? We're next. But who knows when that'll happen, right? Humans are pretty impressive. We've done a lot. Not all of it was good, but hey, we're learning. Every single cell in your entire body knows how to replicate DNA. But you, as a conscious human, well, you have absolutely no idea, do you? We're actually pretty dumb. You can see it daily. We're so slow that we had to make an undo button for the undo button. We're spending billions upon billions of dollars to develop artificial intelligence in computers because, well, we can't develop enough intelligence in ourselves. We make mistakes. We're pretty brutal too. We enjoyed the idea of punching so much that we turned it into a sport. And it's not even who can punch the most or the hardest. The weird thing is that the less punching you do, the better you are at the sport. It's like golf, except the ball is the other person's face. Now that I think about it, we should make a show where pro athletes fight convicted felons. We could call it pros versus cons. We kind of invented time though, so props to us on that one. But dogs? Dogs are a different breed. Literally. Dogs can understand human language pretty well if you think about it, but we can't even understand what a single bark means. Maybe they have better language skills than we do? They probably think we're hypocrites too. We scold them for going to the bathroom in the house, but they've probably seen us do the same exact thing hundreds of times. You know, it's funny. It's more socially acceptable to dislike children than it is to dislike dogs. I hate children. Sorry. Dogs are cool, but I hate mosquitoes. The degree to which one hates mosquitoes is in direct proportion to how much mosquitoes love them. It's a love-hate relationship. A lot of times, you just immediately smack them and, well, end their life. They're pretty brave creatures for only having 1 HP. But if you really think about it, you're only killing the slowest and smallest ones, meaning you're leaving only the biggest, fastest, and best mosquitoes alive to breed and make even bigger mosquitoes. You can't win. But on the topic of death, as usual, I've been thinking about it recently. If somehow we manage to cure aging and all diseases known to man, that means the only way we could die would be from horrible and gruesome deaths. If you Google a question and the person who posted the answer to it has died, Google basically functioned as a Ouija board, didn't it? And you know, most of us spend a good bit of time in cemeteries in our lives. It sucks, but you essentially keep visiting cemeteries until you stay there permanently. They're full of various kinds of people from all around the world. Doctors, lawyers, engineers, war heroes, people from every corner of the planet. But speaking of war heroes, most people who participate in wars don't really get to find out if they won, do they? There are heroes in every aspect of life, but the most impressive ones I find are people who take naps. It takes real courage to wake up twice in one day, as if once wasn't hard enough. You're a different person to everyone you meet. You're the hero, the villain, the sidekick, and even the extra in other people's life stories. But don't think about it too much. It changes a lot. When you meet people from your past, they remember a version of you that probably no longer exists. And if it's been more than about 7 years, you are literally, fundamentally, an entirely different person. Every cell in your body has been replaced with a new one. So if people keep telling you you've changed, well, you have. Just own it. But hey, pretty much everyone in 2015 who was asked, "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" probably got that question extremely wrong. That's just how the world works. But you know, I actually hate that phrase. The same people who respond with, "That's how the world works," when told to be nice or something, are the exact reason why that's not how the world works. A lot of the world's problems exist simply because there's just too many of us, and we're stubborn. We don't like change. Quick question. Do you think babies know that dreams are real? Because if not, they must think they go on the most insane adventures every day. Maybe that's why they cry when they wake up. Their brain just made up stories that aren't real, but they get scared of them because they don't know any better. I guess it's better to wake up from a bad dream and realize it was all in your head, as opposed to waking up from a good dream and realizing that none of it happened. Speaking of babies though, it's okay. They can't even count. They're just dumb sacks of meat. But there reaches a certain point in everyone's life where how high can you count changes from a matter of knowledge to a matter of sheer willpower. A lot of things change as you get older. As a child, you're amazed by some of the things that adults are able to do. But once you're actually an adult, it becomes very clear that most adults are unable to do some of the most simplest tasks. In fact, the information age, the age of the internet, has produced the first generation of grandparents who are not by default the most knowledgeable and well-informed people in any room they enter. As we get older, the younger are getting smarter and smarter, but it doesn't really seem like it, does it? We all share the same birthdays and birth years as other people, but as time goes on, as they slowly die, you get closer and closer to being the last one alive. It makes you wonder who the last person born in the 1900s will be, and where we'll be when that day comes. In fact, if you're under the age of 40, the oldest living person on the planet has been asleep for more years than you've been alive. But just like time, years are man-made. Like, if somehow we all came to a consensus and agreed, we could live in the year 3000 starting tomorrow. And you know, maybe that's what we need. 2020 has been rough on everyone, and in some places, it's not really getting any better. It's crazy. I live in an apartment, and I'm at the point where I know my neighbors more than I'd like to. I can hear them waking up. I know what time they do their dishes. I know what time they wash their clothes. It's creepy. I feel like a stalker. I swear, I'm not.
So I made this video on the English language last year. I double checked, and yep, it's still weird. Like, when you scratch something out of your notes, you're just noting to yourself that that note no longer needs to be noted. And like, why do horrible and horrific mean the same thing, but terrible and terrific mean the opposite? To make matters worse, the phrase "this blows" and "this sucks" are both opposite and identical at the same time. A lot of our phrases don't even make that much sense to begin with. Slow and steady wins the race works for a lot of things actually, but the one thing it doesn't actually work in is in an actual race. Being on thin ice with someone is mostly a bad thing, but breaking the ice is usually a good thing? People usually put "gone but not forgotten" on their tombstones, but for most people, after like 3 or 4 generations, that's really just not true at all. If anything is possible, then isn't it possible that some things are impossible? In the same way, I guess, when people say we're not perfect, doesn't that make us perfect at not being perfect? I'm just gonna confuse myself if I keep going. Why do we have fingertips but not toe tips? Like we can tiptoe but we can't finger tip? You also don't really know how the word red is red, unless it's red. And the more I light my lighter, the lighter my lighter gets until it's too light to light. The word separate is written all together, but the words altogether are written separately. Extraordinary and extraordinary are antonyms. You know, it's crazy what a single space can do. But remember, every single time you press the spacebar, there are 6 million other people pressing it at the same exact time as you are. Speaking of space, in the last Shower Thoughts video, I mentioned reality television. I double checked this too, and yeah, it still sucks. But don't you think a really good show would be flying flat earthers into space and watching them react to it? Sure, it'd be expensive now, but in like 20 years, maybe not so much. If you made it to space, congratulations. You're casually floating around in the void. Now if you just randomly started peeing, you would actually cause an acceleration. It'd work the same way that a rocket does. This wouldn't work if you're dehydrated though. Drink your water. But even then, we don't buy water, we rent it. We use it, then return it, it's cleaned, and then sold back to you again. Life is crazy. In other water-related news, fire trucks are just water trucks. You know, shout out to water. Through condensation and precipitation, for almost 4 billion years, it's been traveling all around and throughout the planet, only to end up in my shower. You know the deal by now. These are shower thoughts. Things have changed a lot over the course of history. There are people alive in their 90s that were born before the world's population hit 2 billion. When the world's oldest person, Kane Tanaka, was born 117 years ago, the global population was just 1.6 billion. In just one person's life, we've gone from 1.6 to 8 billion. Countries are constantly changing. The majority of superpower countries in the world have been around for thousands of years, and most of the cities in the world are probably older than the countries they're in. If you're 25, you've been alive for over 10% of the United States' history. That's kind of insane when you think about the position the country has gone through over the past 250 years. The good, the bad, and even the ugly. Okay, maybe a lot of ugly. Anyway,
You know, they say it takes 10,000 hours to master a skill, but I've been alive for way more than 10,000 hours, and I've yet to master the skill of life. When you're a kid, you think adults somehow know everything and have their lives together. But once you grow up, you realize that many people genuinely have absolutely no clue what they're doing sometimes. Also, when growing up, you realize how absurd daily life is. We paid the zoo to look at a bunch of stolen property, most of us have dead bodies in our freezers, and your lap only really exists when you're sitting. When you stand up, it just becomes your legs again. I don't make the rules, okay? Life is frustrating, and something that's been frustrating me lately more than usual is that we have wireless chargers that are actually more restricting than just normal wired chargers. It's fine though, no one is texting me anyway. Most of the time, having the last word in an argument means you've won, but if that argument is over text, getting left on red kinda feels like you've lost. Oh, and by the way, if you didn't know, your fingers don't have muscles in them. Whenever you move your fingers, your palm and forearm are doing 99% of the work. Your handwriting is actually just your hand's accent, so I guess slurring your words when you speak is just talking in cursive. Remember though, you don't get paid on how hard you work, you get paid on how hard you are to replace. Life isn't fair, but at least we're trying, right? Birth certificates are usually the first participation award people get in life. It's kind of weird welcoming a child into the world, since they've already been here as long as everything else has, just in a different form of matter. I guess it's just like celebrating the temporary collection of atoms that make you, you. Wow, I think I actually just described birthdays, what? Death certificates are pretty much like saying thanks for playing. We pass the anniversary of our death every year without knowing. Who knows, it could even be today. Death is a movie, nightmares are just the trailers. They say that life flashes before your eyes when you die, so what if every time you blink, you're actually just taking screenshots to show yourself before you die? The last person in your friend group will go to all of your funerals, but no one will go to theirs. Don't feel sad though, this just means that they're the last friend to hatch their skeleton. Most video games prevent you from sleeping when danger is nearby. Think about that the next time you can't fall asleep at night for no reason. Remember everyone, if you can't sleep, just know that if you lay down with enough force, you'll fall asleep instantly. Are you scared of heights? A lot of people are, and miss out on things like parachuting. But there's no reason to worry. If your parachute doesn't open, you have the rest of your life to fix it. You're not afraid of falling, you're just afraid of hitting the ground. You don't really know that you've forgotten something until you can't remember it. Think about how many things you've actually forgotten. Oh wait, you can't. But speaking of forgetting things, the center of gravity is the letter V, and it's pointing down. And I couldn't fix that parachute. You're a murderer, you know that, right? You've murdered trillions of bacteria in the shower. Fun fact, cannibalism can solve both the issues of overpopulation and world hunger at the same time. Two birds with one stone. Alright, so plastic dinosaurs are made of plastic, and plastic is made of oil, and oil comes from fossil fuels, from actual dinosaurs. So technically, dinosaurs never left, we're just turning them into plastic. We've always been told that an asteroid killed the dinosaurs, but what if the asteroid was just a spaceship, and we're the aliens? Take Me to Your Leader is just the alien version of Let Me Speak to Your Manager. For some reason, we've been pretty much branding aliens as Karens all along. We've been looking for extraterrestrial life for decades, but we can't really find anything. Most of us just completely dismiss UFO abduction stories because, well, they're usually insane and made up. An animal who was captured from the wild and studied by human biologists would probably tell the same story. Because of this, life is seen as rare. But think about it, the rarest animals on Earth might not actually be rare, they might just be really good at hiding from us. It's the same principle. Now that I mention it, the principle of YouTube itself is interesting to say the least. It feels like whoever you're watching is talking directly to you and you never think anything of it. But in reality, I'm here in my room by myself, talking to myself. I'm lonely. Everyone loves to comment first like they're proving something, but if you really want to be special, being last is a lot more impressive. I can understand it though. The first person to do anything is usually the one that's remembered for it. But since we don't remember pretty much anything from when we were babies, can you even remember the first time you started gaining consciousness? Maybe that's exactly what our first memory really is. You really have zero idea of when you were born, you just take everyone else's word for it. Fruit, just like humans, have belly buttons where they were plucked from, and your belly button is technically just your old mouth. So now that I think about it, the fruit we grow is essentially eating away at the sun, every single day, and we eat that fruit, so in a sense, the sun doesn't really taste that bad. I know, that can be a lot to take in, so just relax for a second. But wait, if you're laying on an open field, that kinda makes the entire earth your backpack, so you're pretty much carrying the weight of the world. People usually say things like, I'm 6 feet tall, but that's only when you're standing. If you're laying down, you're 6 feet long, so technically, tall people sleep longer. When you hug someone, so like once a year for most of us, they're the closest person in front of you, but at the same time, they're also the furthest person on Earth behind you. I know, it's sad. But hey, you've survived 100% of the things you've ever encountered in life. You're undefeated. Every person you know knows a different version of you. It's like you're a video game and everyone you know is at different save points. The only thing is, you're the only one who can finish it. But remember, the person you see in the mirror and the voice you hear in your own head is not the same person that the rest of the world sees and hears. The only person who truly knows you is yourself, and you don't even know yourself that well. You've forgotten most days of your life, just as everyone else has, and you'll continue to forget. So for now, for the time being, even if the world is falling apart, just try and remember the good. And by the way, the letter W definitely starts with a D.
The year 2022 has been one of the most stressful for a lot of us. Just coming out of a pandemic and trying to find our place in the new world, we've been tossed into economic instability, massive layoffs, and incredibly high inflation rates. But it's the end of the year. It's time to relax, unwind, and recharge for the new year. So for the next 1 hour, I want you to shut off the serious part of your brain. Let's think about the